So this program is fairly new and is still getting going, and we've been doing this research conference for several years as a way to advertise that we are here and also to provide that kind of interaction that I just talked about. The program has a minor in civic engagement leadership, and students can take that minor along with majors in a variety of disciplines, which they do. We have sociology, psychology, social work, political science, geography, business, communications, all sorts of majors are represented in this minor in civic engagement leadership. For students, there is a packet that you should have gotten when you came in, and it tells you more about the minor. So if you're interested in it, take a look at that packet. So I wanted to have the Dean, Ben Ogles, take a few minutes and welcome everyone. And then I will come back on and talk about the first session.
Hello, I'm Ben Ogles, Dean of the College of Family, Health and Social Sciences. Several years ago, when I arrived on campus, I was at Ohio University for 20 years and then came to BYU, and I needed to get acquainted with the university. And one of the ways to do that is that I formed a committee we called the Futures Committee. And Richard was the head of that committee. Their task was somewhat like strategic planning to assess where the university was and where our college was in particular, and then to think about where we should go from there. As part of that, they did some assessment, and they looked at surveys of our students and also talked to faculty and staff. And one of the initiatives that came out of that was the Civic Engagement Initiative. And interestingly, we discovered when we look at surveys of our students that they're often quite engaged in their religious communities wherever they go around the world and in the nation in particular. But then when you ask specifically about involvement in the community, it's much less involvement in the community. So they, in a sense, they're pretty good at doing volunteer service and participating in a religious community, but then sometimes think that's all their obligation entails, or maybe not obligation, but all that they have time to do. And so we, at Richard's urging and the committee with him, we started the Civic Engagement Minor and Civic Engagement Leadership Initiative in order to try and encourage our students to be more engaged in their communities in addition to the work that they do in their religious communities. And it's been, it's growing, and this research conference is on sign with that. And later in the spring, we have another conference that's more focused on students, and then in between there are speakers that come, and of course the classes that are associated with the minor. To me, it's encouraging and matches what's happening in higher education, and of course the history of higher education would suggest that one of the main points of a liberal education, if you will, is to prepare citizens that can participate in all that happens in our communities and make a difference. And not necessarily just politically, but in other ways. So I'm pleased to welcome you here. I'm glad to have our distinguished guests go around the country. Hope that you enjoy the conference today, and hope a few more people show up as time goes on. It's always a little hard to predict student attendance, but we'll have a good discussion nonetheless. So welcome from our college, welcome to this Civic Engagement Conference. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dean Ogles, who has been extremely supportive of this initiative. So we have a session, we have actually 4 sessions today, 5 sessions today. The first one is going to be one that I'm excited about, how legislators use research to build better public policy, with Karen Bogenscheider, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Then we have a session 11, Education for Liberation, which should be very interesting. And then we have a luncheon, and if you RSVP for the luncheon, it will be on the 3rd floor at 12:15. Byron Johnson will be our speaker for the luncheon. We'll introduce him later on. 1:45, we'll come back and hear from Catherine Broom, what does it mean to be a good citizen in complex and complicated times. And then we will have a student panel. So 4 students have done research on civic engagement, and we're going to hear from them at that time. So excited about the day and the opportunities to interact. So let's hear first from Adam Dines, who's going to introduce this session. Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam Dines. I'm an assistant professor of political science here at UIU. Our speaker, Karen Bogenschneider, is a Rothermel Baskin Professor of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Since its inception in 1992 through 2016, Dr. Bogenschneider served as director of the Wisconsin Family Impact Seminars, which is a series of presentations, briefing reports, and discussion sessions that communicate research-based, family-focused information to state policymakers on timely topics they identify. From 1999 to 2014, she served as executive director and is currently research director of the Family Impact Institute that provides training and technical assistance to about 24 states that have conducted over 200 family impact seminars. Professor Bogenschneider's book, Family Policy Matters, How Policymaking Affects Families and What Professionals Can Do, is in its 3rd edition. Bogenschneider also co-authored with Thomas Corbett Evidence-Based Policymaking Insights from Policy-Minded Researchers and Research-Minded Policymakers. Dr. Bogenschneider was invited to write the Family Policy Decade Reviews in 2000 and 2010 for the Journal of Marriage and Family. In 2014, she gave invited addresses at the United Nations in Geneva and New York on using research to build better public policy for families. She holds a named professorship at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has received several awards for her research and outreach, including being named a fellow and receiving the President's Award from the National Council on Family Relations. So we're very excited to have Karen here and look forward to hearing her presentation. After her presentation, we'll have discussants Alan Hawkins, who's a professor in human development here in the School of Family Life at BYU. Professor Hawkins has done extensive research and written many publications on the role of fathers in child development, as well as on the role of premarital counseling. And our other discussant will be Shalom Levitt, who's assistant professor of family studies, also here at the School of Family Life. And she teaches and conducts research on sexual relationships from the perspective that sexual relationships are deeply meaningful to how we grow as individuals and as couples. So we're very excited to again turn the time over to Karen.
About the motivating force of my career, which is using research to build better public policy for families. And I'm always glad to talk to students, especially as you're in that exciting time of your life as you're figuring out where your future career path may take you. So I thought I'd begin by mentioning that my career path has been kind of unusual. So I've actually gone through tenure twice, both successfully, once on my ability to generate research and once on my ability to disseminate research. So today I'm going to start my talk by talking about the generating research side of my career by overviewing some findings from a new study on how policymakers use research in their decision making. And then at the end I'm going to draw the implications for disseminating research and how you can use these findings to help build better public policy for families. begin by asking you two questions. How many of you think that public policy in the United States could be working better than it is? Alan, you're too enthusiastic. How many of you think that public policy would be better if it were based on hard evidence drawn from rigorous research and dispassionate analysis? Well, there's enthusiastic Alan. So this study addresses an age-old question that I think has perplexed researchers since the origins of scientific inquiry. So in the story of how we do public policy making in this country, why is there this gap between the production of research and its utilization in policymaking? Why don't policymakers use research more frequently and with greater effect? Is it because policymakers don't value the role of research in their policy decisions? So I brought along a former legislator, 26-year legislator, talking about the importance of research in policymaking. So let's listen to her.
I represent the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, and I have never called them for opinions or research to be done on particular issues. Every once in a while, it's very rare that someone from a department would call me from there on a subject matter. It's extremely rare. Maybe once or twice have I ever gotten a call like that. And I don't call the university here to get information.
Oh, that's the wrong video. This is another one. I usually play the other one first, where she says, everything we do is evidence-based policy making. It's what drives us. It's what I use for my research. It's what we do in about 1 minute. She mentions evidence-based policy making 4 times. But then says, this chilling example that she doesn't go to the university to get it. Now let's just listen to another Republican legislator too. He's currently in office. He has a very good sense of humor. Let's listen to him.
When we as legislators do research and want information, when we want to pass a law, we first of all want it to work, at least till we're out of office, because then we don't have to, because once we're gone, well, I'm sorry, but you can't do anything to me. The other thing we do is we want to be able to answer questions that people ask us. And so you don't want to propose something and then there's a pretty obvious question and you can't answer it because you didn't do your research. You don't know what it would be, the answer should be. So a lot of times you do it to cover your bases so that you really have confidence in what you're doing. Really what this is, when you do research and need information, it's to make you feel that you are doing the right thing. That this law is important, it moves things forward, and then you can take those convictions that you're doing the right thing, you did your research, and convince your colleagues that they need to vote for this bill because I have done the research, I understand the situation, I can answer the questions in front of the committee or in front of the press or in front of my constituents.
Now, any researcher worth their salt would say, well, how representative is this legislator? What he's saying is true for him, but is he an anomaly? Is this true for policymakers writ large? What contributions does research actually make to their decisions? So let me start today with some of the encouraging news about scientific inquiry into this age-old question of how research is used to influence policy decisions, with some new studies that the W.T. Grant Foundation has been funding, a whole new generation of studies on whether and under what conditions research influences policy making. So science has moved beyond the tales of non-utilization that really dominated the field in the 1970s, according to a pioneering researcher in this area, Carol Weiss. And today's science tells us that policymakers do use research, but in ways that are more complex, that are more nuanced, and that are more circumstantial than was originally thought. So science has really done well, I would say, in the last decade, providing some empirical evidence about the use of research in policymaking. But it's done less well in another way that science can contribute, and that's developing explanatory theoretical frameworks that will predict future use. So So we still seem to be kind of stumbling around in the dark regarding why it is that policymakers use research. You know, do they turn to research to help them develop good legislation that achieves the outcomes that they really intend, to stop bad legislation from becoming public policy? Do policymakers use it primarily to inform their own decisions, or does it somehow kind of wind its way through the policy process? So our understanding remains dim. I think about why and how policymakers use research. But could it be that we've been looking in the wrong places for the wrong purposes? Quoting Carol Weiss, again, this pioneering researcher, she says some contributions of research are not easy to see. They're not visible to the naked eye. So what we decided to do in this study is look through the eyes of policymakers themselves to hopefully shed some light on some of the strengths and shortcomings of some of our theories of how research is used in policy making. So basically what we did is we went right inside the State House and we talked to policymakers themselves. And then we compared policymakers' perceptions to the predictions of 4 major theories of how research is utilized in policy making. Now these are the theories that we use. First of all, the political administrative decision-making model moves beyond the classic rational decision-making model by shifting away from an analysis of decision-making to an analysis of action. And Elliott theorizes how research becomes part of the discourse as self-reflecting participants sort of deliberate and debate norms and alternatives, but with an eye toward taking concrete action. So that's one theory. A second theory is a typology of research use that was developed by Tseng, Nutley, Walters, and Davies. And for our purposes, we're going to talk about instrumental uses, conceptual uses, and tactical uses. And tactical means simply that you use it to justify a pre-existing position. Now, in the community dissonance model, my colleague Corbett and I look at the purposes for which policymakers use research. So policymakers use research for allocation shifting, awareness shifting, framework shifting, and also for shifting salience, solution, and tactics. I'll be talking about that more tomorrow, actually. And then the fourth theory we use is one of my favorites, actually. This is Kingdon's theory of open policy windows and how research is used to influence the policy agenda. So what is the role of research in recognizing problems, identifying policy responses, and indicating which are politically and economically feasible? Now here's a sample for our study. We did legislators in Wisconsin and Indiana. Both of these have Republican governors, and the legislature is controlled by Republicans. According to Shore and McCarty, Wisconsin is the 6th most polarized state in the nation, and Indiana is the 16th least polarized state in the nation. So we're doing some comparisons there. In round 1, we interviewed 100, these are face-to-face interviews, 106 legislators. We asked about the research use, we asked about the relationships with colleagues, and we asked about polarization. And then round 1, legislators also nominated their colleagues who were exemplar research users. And in round 2, we interviewed 31 of these exemplar research users. So with policymakers, response rates of 20% are typical. And in round 1, we had a response rate of 60%. And in round 2, we had a response rate of 82%. Lots of time on the phone. So for the research exemplars, now these are the 31 research exemplars. 16 were from Indiana, 15 from Wisconsin, 22 men, 9 women, 17 Republicans, 14 Democrats, 20 from the Assembly, 11 from the Senate, most were white. They've served in the legislature an average 11 years, that ranged from 4 to 35. And over 6 in 10 had a master's degree or more, compared to only 3 of 10 in the overall sample. So the research exemplars tended to be more educated. We had slightly more people from Indiana than Wisconsin, slightly more Democrats than Republicans. But our representation of women and the chamber that they were from was representative of the sample. Now, we did semi-structured interviews. The shortest was 41 minutes, the longest was 145. And we asked about definitions of research, how research contributes to policy making. And the interviews were tape recorded and transcribed. And then we used an iterative process to identify the contributions that research makes to policy making. So in the initial analysis of the 106 interviews, 10 contributions, we identified 10 contributions that research made to policy making. So we had the research exemplars rate how often they used research for those purposes. And then we coded the interviews. We did line-by-line coding. And in the first round of coding of the exemplar researchers, an additional 3 contributions of research emerged from the data. And then in the second round of coding, 2 new research contributions emerged. And we dropped one that was only mentioned a couple times. And then I went through and reviewed all 535 codes to flag any that maybe were a little debatable. Then the debatable codes were reviewed by the research team, and these clarifications were added to the coding manual. Then I recorded all of the interviews with these updates. And again, any debatable code was reviewed by the research team. So here's what we found. These 31 research exemplars mentioned 14 different contributions that research makes to policy making. 504 mentions of these 14 research contributions, ranging from a low of 4 mentions to a high of 100 mentions. We then compared policymakers' reports of how they used research to these 4 theories, right? To how scholars say that policymakers are apt to use research. So I think you all have my table. So I'm going to begin by focusing on the 10 research contributions at the top of the table, the ones that received 26 mentions or more. And 4 of these contributions were predicted by 3 or 4 of the theories. So the third most frequent research contribution was mentioned 55 times by policymakers, and this was designing good legislation or stopping bad legislation. This was predicted by all 4 theories. 3 other contributions of research that policymakers mentioned around 30 times were predicted by 3 of the 4 common theories. So they use research to design problems, to raise awareness of why action is needed, to inform their own position, and to justify a pre-existing position on an issue. Now, the contribution that you can see received the most mentions by policymakers was persuading others. This was mentioned 100 times. So developing arguments that support your view or anticipate and counter an opposing view. This was predicted by 2 of the 4 theories. And the second most frequently mentioned contribution, which you can see on the sheet, was to provide a larger context for thinking about issues and a broader understanding of the complexity of issues. That was mentioned 70 times, and again predicted by 2 of the 4 prominent theories. Now, perhaps the most interesting for us was 4 contributions of research that were frequently mentioned by policymakers and infrequently mentioned in our major theories. So let's work our way down the list here. The 4th contribution on the list, which was predicted by none of the theories, is educating others. Legislators mentioned 48 times that they use research for the purpose of educating others. I mean, who knew? They were quite explicit that educating others is quite different than persuading others. They made a clear distinction between this. So here's a representative comment. It's funny, because I think it's a lot of skills that a good professor has to have. And that I think you need to be able to explain the issue in a clear and concise way, so you've got to make it understandable. And then once you're able to get them to understand the issue, then you need to persuade them that your view on it is the correct one. So one part is like information, and the other part is persuasion. It's like a 2-step process. Only one theory predicted another contribution that came up 35 times, and this is improving the decision-making process by enhancing debate, dialogue, collaboration, and compromise. Let me give you a quote here from a Republican senator. Research helps lead to bipartisan collaboration. If your colleagues, even if they know that they're going to be in opposition to you on a number of issues, know that you'll tell them the truth and that you have your facts right, it at least gives you the basis for a compromise. If I think you're a clueless liar, we're not going to get past go. That's another contribution. Another one that was missing from every theory was mentioned 33 times by legislators, is earning the trust of their colleagues as a knowledgeable and credible information source. Let me give you a quote here. This is a Democratic representative. If you become known for the kind of person who uses studies and more facts-based stuff than they do, I think people might give you a little more credit. But if you have to be really careful that you maintain that confidence in people. So in other words, if people kind of figure out like you're just using bad studies to back up your point, that's going to undermine you. And you know it's going into a political plan. Somebody's going to point that out. If you kind of develop a reputation for somebody that's more facts-based, and people feel like, I may not agree with this guy is saying, but I've never known him to misrepresent something, or to just kind of feel garbage. And another frequent contribution that did not appear in any of the 4 major theories is they use research to ask important questions, to prove or disprove a position, or to point out incomplete or misleading research. They do this a lot in theories. Let's have a quote here. This is a Democrat about the whole issue of rape within the state. Some studies have been done that are really creepy, like it's mostly within families, just all kinds of crazy stuff. And then the question's like, okay, why aren't people reporting it? What are the barriers? So there was a decision to have the legislature fund a study to kind of better understand it. Finally, the 4 contributions you can see at the bottom of the list received only 4 to 16 mentions, and they were acknowledged in 3 of the 4 prominent theories. So this means that policy scholars mention these frequently, but they were infrequently mentioned by legislators. So it's changing one's position on an issue, assessing political and economic feasibility of policy issues, offering new and emerging ideas, and explaining the vote on an issue. So in sum, the findings of this paper may help explain in some small way the common perception that research is underutilized in policymaking. It could be that we've been looking in the wrong places for the wrong purposes, and the use of research may be more substantial than we think, perhaps not as substantial as we'd like, but perhaps more so than our theories are predicting. So the prominent theories tend to conceptualize research use as a knowledge-driven process. It focuses on the individual legislator. But these, rather than this more expansive set of contributions that we're hearing about from legislators, and our study is consistent with the findings of this new generation of studies. Research use unfolds within a social ecology of relationships, organizational settings, and political and policy contexts. So I'm going to mention just 3 ways that our findings are consistent with this new body of research. First of all, what we're finding is that research use is not an individual pursuit. It's a team sport. Legislators say you can't come up with an idea on your own and move it anywhere. You've got to work with other people. Now, here's a representative Republican talking about this. This is a relationship business. One of the liabilities for a guy like me who values research is that I sometimes don't focus enough on the relationship side of being a legislator. The reality is if you want other people to pay attention to your research that you believe is important, then it needs to start with having a relationship where you can have communication and trust. If someone won't talk to you or won't take you seriously, it's difficult to present them with research. So these findings move us away from what Mayhew has described as an individualization of politics, and I think help us grasp how relationships influence research use and how research use influences relationships. That's the most important finding of our study so far. Policymakers consistently report that their effectiveness as a legislator depends on earning the trust of their colleagues as a knowledgeable and credible information source, and how fragile that reputation can be. So in our quantitative measure, we ask policymakers to rate on a scale of 1 never to 5 almost all the time each of these 10 initial research contributions. And the mean rating for using research to earn the trust of your colleagues was 4.6, which is about as high as you can get. It's about as high as Ron's apple pie, I think. So, and second, I think the many theories of research utilization fail to acknowledge that even the most instrumental and direct uses of research occur in a political context. So they give short shrift, I think, to how research is used in a decision-making process where policymakers engage in deliberation and negotiation to reach agreement. I heard this in both states, but one legislator who was in the minority described in detail how he had used research to contribute to collaboration and compromise to pass laws on infant mortality and family leave. So our vision is still kind of blurry, but I think our findings shed some light on two other ways that research may influence decision-making, and that's educating and informing others about research usually on pending policy issues, and then also relying on research to ask important questions, to improve or disprove a point, or to point out how good or not so good research is. And finally, when viewed through the eyes of policymakers, the research contribution that they mentioned most frequently was persuading others 100 times. So this leads to a very fundamental question, I think. How important is it that policymakers use research for persuasion? In a democracy, decisions aren't made by raw political power. They're not made by Plato's philosopher kings. They're made by a deliberate process of arguing, negotiating, and compromising in a space that research can be part of. A Republican representative explained it this way in a soundbite that was very good. They practice and perfect this. I think the intersection of policy and politics is that you don't keep the policy enacted unless you convince people. And research helps convince them. Now, our study has several limitations. The data comes from self-reports. It's policymakers' perceptions of how they use research. They define research in different ways. And there's no bright line or clear marker of whether each theory explicitly or implicitly included a specific research contribution. So I'm not suggesting the findings are definitive, but they're suggestive, I think, that our theories of research utilization might be too limited in their conceptualizations. So our theories, I think, might shed more light by being more expansive, by being more broad-ranging in their predictions of how research benefits the policymaking process, policymakers' reputation as a trusted information source, and policymakers' effectiveness in educating others and asking important questions. So by turning insiders, by looking through the eyes of policymakers, we've broken through some of the darkness that we've been stumbling around in. I think our findings shed new light on the contributions that research makes to policymaking that perhaps have been less visible to the naked eye. Now, in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to mention the pragmatic implications of the study slide. I kind of mentioned it. I have spent 25 years communicating research to policymakers using the Family Impact Center method. This is a series of presentations, discussion sessions with making reports. We communicate high-quality outcomes of research to policymakers on topics they identify. Our goal is to build greater respect for and the use of research in policy decisions. And I think the findings of the study indicate the importance of communicating research to policymakers. They're going to use it for a variety of purposes and for in their own ways. And we have evidence, which I won't go through today, that the seminars have influenced policy decisions, and they have actually changed policymakers' attitudes about how practical research is and how approachable researchers are. And I have hundreds of these videotapes. I'm going to show you just one from a legislator telling about how he used research from a seminar that we did on a senior prescription drug law right before it was passed.
We didn't have a prescription drug plan in the state. So this was a timely seminar because we were in the process of making decisions on what it should be. And I served in the assembly on the health committee. And we were looking at one that was going to cost $1 million. Well, I think it was like $20 a person. Well, that's nothing. But what we had is we had you have experts come in and talk to us and tell us what other states were doing, what it cost, what good information. So that helped me as a legislator, sort of working on the fringes of that thing, saying, well, if you're going to do it, you got to spend enough money to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, don't do it. And realizing that if you start it, it's going to, probably the biggest thing is if you start it, it's going to cost a heck of a lot more in a couple of years than you ever trained. So don't go with the illusion that you spend, 14 million today, in 3 years it'll be 14 million. It will be a lot more. And guess what? They were right. And nobody was shocked. Well, some people were shocked, but anybody who studied it.
But most of them, not everyone.
Not yet, Tom. Wait just a minute. The second finding we have is I think it supports how we communicate research to policymakers. In some ways, it's almost like a paradigm shift. We no longer think about disseminating research to policymakers. We think about developing relationships with them. And this is a co-author of one of my books, Tom Corbett, talking about the importance of relationships. Let's see if he'll talk now.
But most of all, be prepared to get in and better understand the policymakers' world. Spend some time in it. Get to know people who do this. Develop relationships. Nothing is going to better both prepare you to work in the policymaking world as well as ease your transition and make you more effective than if you develop relationships with policymakers and begin to develop some trust that goes both ways. Learn how to talk with them, learn how to listen to them, learn how to interpret the kinds of pressures that they're under, learn what's important in their world, and try to communicate to them what's important in yours as well. All that takes time, all that takes dialogue, but that's the price you have to pay. Unless you simply want to issue your reports, send them into the policy-making process, and have them hit the floor with one resounding thud.
Tom. So let me conclude by encouraging all the students in the room today to think about your teacher's career. Think about studying the use of research and policy. Think about doing public policy, studying public policy, doing public policy. If we're going to use research to build better public policy, we need you. We need your ideas. We need your passion. We need your vision. Again, Tom Corbett always gets the last word.
Not everyone can do good policy work and feel comfortable with it. But if it is in your heart, do it. Go for it. There isn't.
Thank you.
Dr. Goldschneider for her presentation. If you want to, let me join the discussion.
Okay.
Table. So if Dr. Wilkins and Levitt, or Hawkins, sorry. So I think the way we'll do this, we'll have discussants make their comments first and give opportunity for Dr. Bogenschneider to respond. And then we can also open it up to a broader discussion with the audience.
About 5 minutes, is that each?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And then I'll try to moderate things from here.
Well, it's good to be here, and I've enjoyed reading Dr. Bogenschneider's paper and listening to her. I've been actually a long-distance student of Dr. Bogenschneider's as I tried to learn this policy world, kind of bootstrapping it. And as a naive professor, trying to get involved in the policy world, where I've seen some research that says there's some things that we ought to be doing in regards to helping, in my situation, helping couples form and sustain healthy marriages. There's some pretty straightforward research, basic researches as well as applied research, that suggests that we could be doing better policy-wise in helping that. And I thought if you found a legislator who would sponsor your wise bill And if you went and presented the research on that in front of the legislature, you're in. And I learned that I was wrong. And so I think what I'll focus my comments on is what I've learned, particularly your last point that you were making there, Karen, about relationships. And what I've learned is that you've got to have those relationships in order to make some headway in this policy and legislative process. A few years ago, I served on the Utah Marriage Commission, and 5 years ago, our commission died, but was saved by a legislator who actually put us in statute. And as we did so, we made the decision to put legislators on the Utah Marriage Commission. And so for 5 years, we've had these legislators coming to our meetings, and they've seen that we're not crackpots.
Yeah.
They've seen that we're saying that we actually act, we're pretty good.
Yeah. You're approachable.
Yeah, and have learned along with us, kind of, as we bring research to the work that we do, they see that, and so that has, I think, helped. Not that we've been successful in a lot of things legislatively yet, but it certainly helped us advance our bills that we've been trying to do. I had an interesting experience this summer that way. So one of the members of our commission is a senator in Utah. He's also a divorce lawyer. And I had an experience last winter. I teach the mandated divorce orientation course to divorcing parents here in Utah. And I was always telling them that one of the things they have here in Utah is that we have what we call a conciliation statute, which means that if your spouse wants a divorce, but you want to keep working on the relationship, you can go to a judge and say, Judge, would you please call a timeout and order a good faith showing and counseling? And I've been doing that for 4 years, and I got a call from a participant who said, well, I talked to my lawyer about that, and he said you're wrong. I said, no, I'm not. I've read the statute. Your lawyer is just... Well, it turns out I was a little embarrassed because I went back and reread the statute and said, yes, you can do that, but you have to go to the judge before your spouse files a petition for divorce. And all these people I've been teaching, these are all individuals who are already in the legal process. Well, I went and talked to this member of the commission, who's a divorce lawyer. I said, this doesn't make any sense. He says, you're right. It was a little too late in the process. He opened the bill file, but it was too late to do anything that session. He thought maybe we should try and do something next session. A couple of months ago, I got a call from this legislator. He said, I'm going to send you a report. There was the Utah Bar Association had a bunch of people, some lawyers come in, and they were looking at some revision of laws around divorce. And they have recommended that we take out the divorce conciliation statute and that we get rid of our waiting period here in Utah. Well, I was already right there. I said, Lyle, here's what the research says. And I quoted him right off the top of my head. I thought that was really impressive. I've been doing this research a lot usually. So here's what the research says about waiting periods and why it makes sense and why a conciliation possibility also makes sense. And he says, yeah, maybe we better do something. We've got a committee hearing here tomorrow. That's the way the legislators always work. The hearing's tomorrow. Can you come? And would you come and talk to these folks? And so I did, waited for 2 hours while they discussed some other bill that made no sense to me. And then I got my few minutes. But, and he's planning on running a bill. He doesn't run bills very often. But because we had that relationship over 5 years, and I think he trusted me, he knew who to call. Whether we will succeed, I don't know. But there's going to be opposition to passing some reform, some divorce reform, that to me does not coincide with what we know about our research. So you have to do that. maybe I'll just say one other thing that I've done. The other thing that I've learned is that legislators don't take my calls, even as the chair of the Utah Marriage Commission. They don't take my calls, they don't respond to my emails. So we hired a secret weapon. Our commission was began back in 1998 when Governor Mike Leavitt was governor, and his wife Jackie wanted to do something more around marriage, and so they formed this marriage commission. But Jackie wasn't a member of it. But we decided to put Mrs. Leavitt on our commission. And guess what? Whenever she calls and whenever she emails a legislator, they are right back to her. She's this sweet little middle-aged woman who's got a tiger in her, and she knows how to work this. I've been up at the legislature with her. I just stand there in the halls and legislators pass by, and everyone knows her, and she says, "Hi, how are you doing? How are your kids? How's your wife?" She calls her by name. Said, "Oh, by the way, this is Dr. Hawkins. He's chair of the Utah Marriage Commission, and we're working on a bill." And there he is, right there to talk to. So those sometimes it's not you, but you hook yourself to a star who can catch you. Anyway, I think it is important. I'm done.
I don't know, Dr. Bovenstein, if there's anything you want to respond to, or
relationships are really important. We kept hearing this in the interviews, and so I developed a list of 9 other ways you might be effective without relationships. Like, could you work through leadership and use their relationships? So you don't have to have yourself use leadership. That's another. So I went through 9 different ways. Oh, if you're just smart, just like a Dr. Spock.
That's what I thought.
Dr. Spock legislator. Could you move things forward just because you're brilliant? Everybody realizes it? No. So relationships are just critical, and they are very good at them. They're very good at relationships with each other.
Yeah.
But I think it's more than relationships. It's getting the right person. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is you find a friendly legislator, somebody you know, but they may be, I call them back pew sitters. They're not a leader. So you need to find someone who is a mover and a shaker. So it's not just any legislator that will do. It needs to be one. And especially if they're interested in your issues, that really helps too. And I'll talk more tomorrow about how you can figure out who those people are. But like you were saying, policy making is different. You don't have a parking spot up there, right? Things don't start and stop on time. Things get canceled at the last moment. We have a lot of appointments canceled. It's just the way it goes. I mean, they're really busy. We think they're really busy. So it's just the way things go. So you have to get used to that process, or being asked to do something the next day and then have to wait 3 hours. I mean, that's just the way it works. And I think you made an important point, which is find someone to make the entree if you don't have it. So if you know someone who that legislator knows, then you can leverage that. Leverage that relationship. So that's a good way to get in. And the other thing I learned is just to be patient. Like you said, nothing happened, and all of a sudden you get the call from the legislator. I interviewed a person who was nominated by his colleagues as being the most effective legislator in Indiana. And I interviewed him, and he had like a credential like this behind his desk. And it was all full of manila folders. So they were those little old metal things, so that you just sat. So what are all those folders? Well, those were all his research folders on every issue that he worked on. Very conscious research user. And then he told me about this bill that he'd been working on for 10 years. And it was such a good idea. The research supported it. It just never went anywhere. In 1 year, somebody got interested, and it passed relatively quickly. So sometimes, the ideas that go forward, when a crisis happens, the actions you take depend on the ideas that are laying around. They make no treatments like that. When a crisis occurs, how do you say that? What happens going forward is the ideas that are laying around. So you've got to have these ideas laying around. Yeah. And you have to be patient. It just can be slow. Yeah. And timing is everything. So you've got to wait for that.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was wonderful. I come at social science a little different because I was a practicing lawyer for 20 years. And so what I have noticed is that sometimes there's a disconnect between legislators and social scientists, and we don't really speak the same language. And so this was brought to my attention at a conference I attended a few years ago where it was a conference on aggression. And all of this wonderful research was being presented about violence in entertainment and how really detrimental it was, especially for young children, but also for adults. And this group of scientists were just in disbelief that we could not get something passed to kind of curtail the kind of violence that we saw in young children's games and movies and entertainment. And I realized as I was sitting there listening to the debate that the lawyer side of me was saying, well, yeah, but a lot of this might infringe on other rights that we really hold dear and that other people could maybe perceive as it impinging on freedom of speech, parental rights, all of these other issues. And so sometimes I think as social scientists we need to learn to be a little more bilingual in understanding and even bicultural, understanding what the concerns of legislators are. That they're not just looking at, wow, this is great research. It really does have an impact on children and adults. And so we really do need to move something forward. But they have other issues to also consider. And I also liked your point when I think it was just kind of getting to the point of, is the issue right? Has something occurred in society that society is now willing to look at this great research and do something about it? So I think that we as scholars have to really engage, we hope to engage in legislative change. Not only does our scholarship have to be excellent, but we also have to find the capacity to fit our research and complement it with the issues that the legislatures are dealing with. And so we have to build these relationships like you talked about, and then learn to be bilingual and bicultural in helping governmental officials understand what it is that the research says and that we can do and the implications of it. And sometimes maybe the answer is not a change in policy or a new law. Maybe it's simply education. And legislation can also help us with that. And I think a lot of times what we need to do is just educate society on the detrimental effects of violence or these marriage laws that need to be changed. And sometimes that creates an uprising, like you said, that eventually will motivate change in government.
It's a very good point. Being bilingual, being bicultural, understanding the world. We're just working on another paper now where we've coded all of the data for what their culture, professional culture is like, what their institutional culture is like, and we're starting to code that data to update our theory about researchers and policymakers living in different worlds and how we communicate. And you and I talked about that at dinner, that I think we need to take the first step, not wait for them to come to us. We need to take, you mentioned that. And the timing is just critical. I have videotapes of legislators saying, if that issue isn't coming up this biennium, it's not the right time. It's not the right time to talk about it. So you have to be patient. And one reason our seminars have been quite successful is legislators identify the topic. We have 12 advisors, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, who always have to be equal. We go in with a list of 6 topics. We don't go in just with the world as any issue. And then we ask them what issues are coming up for which research might be useful. And that way you eliminate. There's some topics where people have sort of made up their mind and research won't be useful. But there are many where, and I think the family issues are issues where there is more agreement. We're finding the youth and family issues are less partisan than other issues. So I think we've got a greater opportunity to move those issues forward because most people believe that families are important. So you don't have to convince them. Like climate change, you've got to start with, is climate change real? You've got to get it past that. With families, you don't. I mean, people accept that families are important, so then you're already at the next step of what we're going to do about it. So I think we've got maybe more potential, not in all family issues, but in general, more opportunity. So.
All right, well, let's open it up to the audience if you have questions. I know I have some as well, and maybe I'll chime in, but I want to give you an opportunity first. Yeah.
My question is for Professor Bogenschneider. As you were talking, I kind of thought about how much time it takes to really go in on the research for these things. Like the merit proposal that you brought up, you said that the session just ran out of time. And I found myself thinking of my own upbringing in California, where we have a full-time legislature versus Utah. And I was wondering if in your studies you found any difference between research increases in the full-time legislature versus a part-time legislature.
Question.
Well, I can only speak about Wisconsin and Indiana, and we took these two states because we were doing family impact seminars and then had relationships built up, and that accounts in part for the response rate that we got. But Wisconsin is the 6th most polarized state in the nation, more polarized than Congress. And Indiana is the 16th least polarized, and they're both totally Republican, the governor and both houses. The polarization is very obvious to me in doing interviews. I did interviews in both states. They feel quite different. And we also did a quantitative indicator, asking some questions like, how many opportunities do you have to meet with colleagues? How much opportunity does the minority party have to make? Contributions to policy, how much is research used? How polarized is it? With one exception, all of them were statistically significant, even though it's a relatively small sample in the direction we'd expect. So in Wisconsin, where it's more polarized, they thought it was more polarized. Research is used less. There's fewer opportunities to talk to your colleagues. There's fewer opportunities for the minority party to make contributions to policy decisions. And also, so they talk to people across the aisle much less in Wisconsin. There's just not any opportunities to talk to somebody across the aisle. And that's one reason the seminars are very effective. We provide a nonpartisan neutral opportunity for discussion, which they don't have. There's more opportunities in Indiana, but I also noticed we had a significant difference in how partisan youth and family issues are. So they're more partisan in Wisconsin, even though people in Wisconsin said they're less partisan than other issues, they're significantly more partisan than in Indiana. And also, we're noticing that legislators in Wisconsin are less apt to contact the university for research. So the polarization extends to issues, extends to their contact with the university. I don't know which comes first, but we're noticing quite a bit of difference. Wisconsin is much better staffed, and they have more staff in their office. They have probably, even a minority legislator would have one full-time staff person in Wisconsin. And if you're in the majority, you might have 2. And if you're in the majority in the Senate, you might have 4. So those people can help you find research, right?
Yeah, that's one thing I've learned. Sometimes you need it's the staff that you need to be targeted
Right.
as a researcher.
So in Indiana, they only have a third of staff. Even if they're a committee chair or something like that. So it's much harder for them to find research. So they're much less staff. So those are the differences I've noticed so far. But the staff are extremely important. So to get that high response rate in most states, you're working totally with staff.
Let me put in a plug here for the
Yeah.
students who are here. Here in Utah, many of our legislators do not have any staff at all. Their staff is a student intern who comes and works with them during the legislative session, and they do the research for them. So if you haven't heard about that program, talk to Dr. Davis and learn about it, because you can actually have some influence. And you can be that conduit of good research because they don't have the staff
That's
to do
right.
it.
And they would really welcome that, because the whole thing operates on trust. So if you have good information, your colleagues trust you, your constituents trust you, you get reelected. If you go out with information that gets proven to be false, it's a partisan environment. People are going to be looking, it's going to get challenged. So if you go out there with something that's false, you lose the trust of your colleagues. They say, well, we can't trust that person because why did you call it garbage? They're just throwing garbage out there. Very, very important to be trusted. So having good information is very important to them because it helps them be effective during the trust of their colleagues. So if you would volunteer to help them in the office, they would love it. They would absolutely love it. Especially in the lighter staffed ones, I think, because in Wisconsin they just do ones. The other people that they work with a lot are, I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, I looked a little bit in Utah. There are nonpartisan legislative service agencies in both states, and Utah is organized pretty similarly to Wisconsin. So there's a fiscal office, there's a sort of a general counsel office, there's an auditor's office. And we're finding in our study that's the first place people go for research. So this is another place you could make relationships. If you make relationships with those people, they will get into the hands of legislators. And those are staff usually been there 20 years. They specialize, they'll probably know your topic pretty well. And so that would be, I think it's an untapped place that universities could go to get in. I'm there, I know there was some question.
It might be a little off topic, and I don't even know if there's a real answer for the question, but as through this whole discussion, and you mentioned the idea of partisanship and how difficult it is and how much less partisans will listen to or even consider sound policy research. Do you think it's a problem? I mean, you said it's a problem on the state legislative level, and obviously it's a problem on the national level where you can flat out lie, and nobody, and even if it's challenged, the adherence to that person's philosophy doesn't get, it's just this cognitive dissonance. So I guess my question is there a way to combat this growing phenomenon that as it takes place on a national and a local level?
Tough question. Things are, in general, less partisan at the state level than in Congress. I think the opportunities are greater at the state level because they have less access to research. I've always wanted to figure out in Congress how many think tanks there are within a quarter of a mile of the Capitol. I mean, and you can go to one website, you can get everybody's name and email address. You can't do that at state. It's harder to kind of do that at the state level. But there tend to be more moderates at the state level. I think there are extremely good legislators. I think we tend to stereotype them, maybe because of what we see in the media. And this was the most rewarding experience of my life. I probably did 2/3 of these interviews myself. Unbelievably strong people that run, really committed to the public good. I don't always agree with them. They're promoting issues that maybe I don't personally agree with, but they're doing it out of their heart. They believe it's the right thing to do. And I'm starting to code now how many of them say their colleagues are there for the right reasons. Very high percentage believe that their colleagues are great people. So I'm a very hopeful and optimistic person that this can change, that research can help it change, that youth and family issues can help it change. And I wonder, Richard, you talk a little bit about this third party. Like, would you be comfortable mentioning it? I mean, I think that's another way that maybe things will move. Did you want to?
Don't want to use the Q&A time to do that. But that is a way, is to create a new political force. That's what's necessary in order to kind of move the establishment forward. Yeah.
And you mentioned to me earlier that young people may be a very important part of it.
That's right. That's right.
You know, many young people want to see more collaboration, more compromise. And young people can be a force for moving us forward, for asking for this, for asking for legislators to do this, and for rewarding legislators who do it. I was amazed at how little positive feedback legislators get about their performance. One reason we got this high response rate is we had their colleagues nominate who were good research users, for example, and then we kept track, right? Who got the most votes? So then I emailed them, and I said, you were nominated by your colleagues. They were so honored. They said, I had no idea that you made my day. This is the best thing that happened to me this session. I mean, unbelievable. They just, I coded for it. I'll be able to add this all up, but it was amazing to me that they aren't rewarded for doing the right thing, for compromising. I mean,
Well, you mostly hear from others and constituents in particular when things are going bad. Everyone's always upset, I guess.
well, yeah, they're very responsive to their constituents. I mean, that's another thing. Very responsive.
So I saw a hand here.
Yeah. Well, first I just want to say, as a doctoral student looking towards doing my first qualitative study, I'm just impressed with the scope of your study. It's really impressive, so thank you for giving a great example. But I was curious, one, if you know and where you got the information on the polarization and sort of who did that analysis, and where you talked into that.
I should have looked at it.
Yeah, because I was like, I mean, we are extremely Republican in terms of the number of people in both bodies that
I
are.
think in Utah, I think we're kind of in the middle. on
Are
this
you?
issue,
That-
But I'm not totally, I don't totally recall.
I mean, I would be willing to guess that because we are so, the Republican Party is so hyper-represented that we have more dissonance within the party
Oh, yeah.
potentially than maybe some other states, so.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to add was that I run a nonprofit that works in community engagement and the public good of higher ed, and one thing I've started to do is just go to the higher ed appropriations committee meetings just to kind of hear what legislators are saying to help me understand how to translate the work that we're doing into the language that they will understand and is of value to them. So that's just something that I think will be helpful.
You raised an important point. We heard a lot about, these are both red states with strong Republican control, large Republican control. So there is polarization within the party. When you have that much, when the party divide is closer, then you have more polarization across parties. But when it's very deep Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter, there is more polarization within the party. Another thing I'm finding is that the people who are most knowledgeable about research are committee chairs often. Committee chairs are quite powerful. They decide what bills get passed. I interviewed one in Indiana and she said, I killed this in my committee. So they're quite powerful. So what we started doing in Wisconsin, it's been working pretty well, is we took 10 committees that we thought the university had a deep bench of resources, and we went up and we interviewed the committee chairs. And we said, is there any issue coming up for which research would be useful? So we asked them what they needed to know. And then we went back to campus. We found somebody who had expertise on that particular topic. They're often quite general questions. Like, some of the things that you just know, Alan, off the top of your head. And then we coached the researchers about that they should go up. They should not tell them what to do. They should be nonpartisan. They should be respectful. And went through some of the things that we learned. And then we wrote back to the legislator and gave them the person's name and a synopsis of their expertise. And then they made the contact. So when I went to the legislature, and said, is there something you need to know? We'll find someone. They said, well, they know we're here, why don't they come and see us? Okay, then I go to the researcher, and the researcher would say, well, they know we're here, why don't they come and ask us? It's like Match.com, nobody wants to take the first step, so. But some of the most chilling part is I walked into a committee chair's office, and we were waiting outside. They were just lined up. And the last office, the last person left and said, remember to vote for Bill ABC, whatever. And we went in and we said, is there an issue coming up for which research would be useful? He said, what? I said, so we repeated it. And he said, you mean you're offering to help me find information for my agenda? You're not asking me to support your agenda. It was so unusual. We had to repeat it a couple of times so he could get it, wrap his head around it. But, isn't that weird? But I think if you're going to do something as a university, you should do something different, right? If we're going to do the same thing everybody else does, what's the added value? But to try to help them with their agenda is the way.
So real quick on those scores, so if you just Google search Boris Shore, S-H-O-R, he has on his website, he's at the University of Houston now.
Is he at Houston now?
I think so.
Okay.
He was at Georgetown, he was at Chicago, Georgetown.
Yeah.
And he has an update for the 2015. Utah is above the national average, but it's not that far above the national average. The ones really out there right now are California, Colorado, Arizona, Texas.
So it's not really party, some of these.
Yeah, it still
not
is
party.
polarized. There's still is polarization.
Polarization isn't determined by the party, though, because like California would be Democratic state.
Yeah.
Wisconsin's Republican. Colorado would be.
Wisconsin's a bit more polarized than Utah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So in the back.
You mentioned a little bit that these government officials are representatives of the public, and that you need to have a certain culture where issues are going to become important. So I'm wondering if you think about, perhaps in Canada we talk a lot about knowledge dissemination as the role of the university. So definitely presenting your research and sharing that in a policy environment. But what about the research dissemination to the public that the representatives are elected to represent, and helping perhaps to shape people's knowledge and information, if there's ways of being able to help the public be more educated, that gives you, hopefully in a representative democracy, a way of pushing for some policy changes.
I think that's a very good point, because they are very responsive to their constituents. So also educating the public is helpful, right? Because it helps shape their opinion. We tried this a couple times at the seminar. So we would do in the evening, we would do a similar event for advocacy groups. We don't invite advocacy groups or lobbyists to the seminar itself because we're creating a neutral, nonpartisan environment, which is, again, very unusual. So if you're at a university, you want to do something unusual. So we don't have lobbyists and press there. It's really impressive the kinds of questions they ask. They're very open, sort of questions. So then we would do something for the advocacy community, so that the advocacy community would have that same research, and could use it. So they also did interviewing about what if what you think your constituents want is different than what you think is best for the state. Some legislators were very eloquent that I represent the state. First my constituents, but the state. So sometimes I have to take a vote that I think is best for the state, but maybe is not what my polls are showing my constituents would want. But then I go back and explain to my constituents why I voted that way. And if you can explain it well, and you've got good research, they'll often accept that, even if they don't agree with you, is what they tell me. But some legislators say, always vote with my constituents. So there, I haven't gone through and counted this up yet, but some really feel that they need to think about the whole state's interest, and some think about their constituents. But they're always thinking about somebody. It's not, their ideas are not just their own. They're always thinking, whether it's their own constituents, whether it's the whole state. They're very responsive to that, to the opinions of
Yeah. So I have a
Yeah.
colleague, someone I do some projects with, he did a project, I think it might have actually been in Wisconsin. It might have actually changed their attitude something. Where he teamed up with some state legislators and had them send out information to voters and their to constituents. And what they did is they surveyed the constituents beforehand to know what their opinions were on issues.
Okay.
Then they had the state legislators send information
Okay.
about their position on it, and purposely sending, sometimes they would get something that they knew that the voter and the legislator disagreed about,
Yeah.
and some things that they agreed on. And then what it is, then they surveyed them afterwards to see, the voters, to see if it changed their position.
Yeah.
And what he found, at least with state legislators, is actually it would, if anything, it moved voters to be more in agreement with their state legislators. And it was even on some hot button issues. And I think he did it in a Midwestern state and kept it vague in their paper.
Yeah,
But I think it was Wisconsin.
really?
So I also wonder if when you talk to them, if some of them are actually thinking about research that happened there that showed that they could educate voters and move
Yeah.
their opinion of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Which
this
was-
is a surprising finding for us. They really see themselves as educating.
But I have to say, it didn't work. They repeated the study at the local level, and it didn't work out
It
as
didn't
well
work.
at the municipal level.
Okay.
The voters were still like, nah, we don't like you, tell us.
No, one thing I might point out, I wish we had some administrators here in the audience. We don't. Maybe I'll just shout so it reaches the administration. But one of the challenges is, I agree, this broad general education purpose is something that we can do and something that I think that is important. In many universities, including our university, however, there's no reward structure for those who would go out and do that kind of slow, laborious work of educating the public. Karen's in a unique position at University of Wisconsin, and I guess you are in a position to do that a little bit more. But my guess is that there's not a lot of ways that you have to do it kind of out of your hide in those places. And I think universities could be more sensitive. They complain all the time, all this great research, and it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you could reward your faculty and your students for getting out there and being, the community professor.
There isn't a lot of reward. So I've edited 33 briefing reports, and editing means I write the chapter for the speaker. I get the research, I write it, because I've interviewed all the legislators, so I know what they want to know. But I put their name on it, so I just go straight these things, and then they approve them. Yeah, you don't get much reward in university for ghostwriting. I'm listed as an editor, but I actually was not. I actually wrote these 33 of these 40-page reports. So you have to be committed to it, But I do think universities could do a better job of rewarding it. And providing support for the infrastructure for doing it. We have research labs, we get support for doing research. There isn't really much support for doing outreach, Yeah, for designing these brochures, for writing these briefing reports. If I'd have had some journalistic editor, good editing, that would have been tremendously helpful. We don't have that kind of infrastructural support for doing this kind of outreach work. They want it done, and they like it when it's done.
But I think there's starting to be more efforts, at least in my graduate training, there were professors who had funds and created programs to try to train students, grad students to do this more.
But universities could give a course release, right? Think if you had a course release. Or they could provide a student assistantship. A student assistantship is helping communicate research to policymakers. They do have resources that they distribute in certain ways, but they could use. Yeah.
So I think we just have a couple more minutes on my clock. If one more quick question, and also opportunity, but if not, I think we can wrap it up. But I do want to say, and this has been mentioned, so I do some work on surveying and interviewing elected officials, and what they've pulled off here, especially Dr. Bogenschneider herself, is very impressive to be able to do all these interviews, and I think it's very commendable and fantastic work. And trying, and descending from our ivory tower and really going where the rubber hits the road and trying to have an impact for good. I think it's
I
phenomenal.
just wish people could have joined me. It is so impressive how people who make this kind of usually to go to this meeting, it's so impressive and so counter to the public perception of policymakers. I'm just not sure how I'm going to communicate that. It was just so rewarding to do and how open they were with me. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
And I agree. As I get more and more involved with state legislators, I become more and more impressed with them and what they're trying to do. And then I listen to the comments of family members and friends and neighbors and colleagues, and the way they talk so negatively about them really kind of bothers me. And I think actually one thing that would help, and I was thinking about this when this gentleman over here asked a question, but I think one of the best things we could do is if we could just pull the plug on the national media that covers the federal government and reports about all of that. It just gives this such a negative vibe about the policy making and legislative process that I think undermines what they try to do.
It just poisons the environment. You hear these stories. And I always tell my academic colleagues, if policymakers refer to us as being nerds and eggheads, we're really offended, right? To be called that. And yet we sort of turn it around and paint them off with a broad brush stroke. Say they're greedy, they're influence-driven, they're undermined, underhanded, and yet, that just hasn't been my experience. So one thing you do is just try to get to know some legislators yourself, and your own legislator, but even better, a legislator who specializes in whatever area it is. And that's a mover and shaker, not the bad case of it.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Dr. Bogenschneider, Dr. Levitt, Dr. Hawkins for your time.